Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this long overdue look at the Tier 8 Soviet heavy tank, the IS-3. Apologies for this video taking so long, people have been requesting this for some time. Unfortunately, the replays and the material that I had prepared for this were patch 9.15, and my patch 9.15 client, as I've said before, went and died. So, yeah. Instead, I've had to get more material for this, and hence this has been a little bit delayed. But, as ever, let's kick off with a little bit of history for this tank. So this machine was developed towards the end of the Second World War, eventually came into service in 1945, a little bit too late to actually see action in World War II. But when it initially came out, I mean, this thing looked completely different from many of the preceding Soviet machines. You didn't have the flat armor angles of the KV tanks, or even of the lower of the previous IS series of tanks. Instead, you had this very low profile, very sleek looking tank with angled armor everywhere, and basically it was first announced in a military parade, or the Allies first got a good sight of it. I say the Allies, the Western nations, shall we say, first got a good sight of it in a military parade, and a lot of the NATO nations were suddenly pooping bricks because it looked like a lean, mean fighting machine. Now, as it turned out, certainly early versions of this tank were not quite as good as the Allies had feared. There were issues like, for example, yes, this has a very low profile, but what does that mean in practice? Several things, including, for example, the fact that the crew had very limited headroom in the turret, and the gun was very limited in how far it could depress, because otherwise the cannon breech would just knock the roof of the turret. And other things like the welding on some of the early versions of these tanks was pretty god-awful. And so, actually, some of this armor would just crack open at the slightest provocation. But nonetheless, this was a pretty revolutionary design and influenced a lot of NATO designs at the time. You had tanks like the Conqueror that were specifically designed to kill this thing. This was considered that much of a threat. And of course, much in common with the later models of IS and later with the IS-2, sorry. You had a great big 122mm gun poking out the front of it. So what do we get in game? Well, we have one of the most widely used and popular Tier 8 heavy tanks. Let's get this right out the way. The IS-3 is, of the Tier 8 heavy tanks that I have played, the IS-3 is easily the best of them, and by a fairly significant margin. If you want to look at my personal stats in the machine, I've played 185 battles, I've got a 59% win rate, most of that is solo, 719 base experience, yeah, I've got an ace tanker in it, 2 marks of excellence, 1721 average damage caused per battle. Now that's a bit of a meaningless number without comparison to other tanks that I play, because, you know, obviously you'd want to keep the player a constant. Just to give you an idea, that is more than I do in any other Tier 8 heavy tank by a fairly considerable margin. Let's switch to another Tier 8 heavy tank. Let's have a look at the Tiger 2, because I played the two machines a lot around about the same time, so that should keep things relatively consistent. 721 damage from the IS-3, 1499 from the IS-2, and that's a trend you see across the board. The IS-3, in the IS-3, I pretty consistently do between 200 and 400 damage per battle on average, more than any other Tier 8 tank. In fact, if you want to look at other tanks in my garage where I have similar amount of damage done per battle, you have to start looking at some of the Tier 9 machines. So let's, for example, look at the M46 Patton, a tank I haven't actually played much in a while. That's got 1720 damage done per battle. So, straight off the bat, let's get this out of the way. The IS-3 is an incredibly powerful machine. Let's have a quick look at why. We're going to start off with the survivability. So we've got 1500 hit points, which is okay for a Tier 8 heavy tank. It's kind of toward the bottom end though. I mean, you've got things like the KV-4 is 1700. You know, the Defender is down at 1500. If we had a look at tanks from different nations, let's just switch it to Tier 8. We've got the Lerva with 1650. The FCM is 1500. Is there a tank with fewer hit points than this? Yeah. The AMX 5100 Tier 8 heavy tank has 1400. The 110 has 1550. So 1500 it's fine. It's there or thereabouts, but it is rather at the bottom end for a Tier 8 heavy tank. So that is the first thing that's probably worth bearing in mind. You get a respectable amount of hit points, but not a huge number. You've got medium tanks like the Pershing and the Centurion that have comparable amounts of HP. Hull armour, 60 at the rear, 90 at the side, 110 at the front. Doesn't sound that impressive, but bear in mind that doesn't tell the whole story. We're going to have a look at the armour in a bit, and you've got angles, you've got spaced armour, you've got tracks adding as spaced armour all over this tank. Turret armour, 100 at the rear, 172 at the side, 249 at the front. Sounds like a pretty good turret. It is a very good turret. Just a quick note about the armour profile. It used to be the case back in the day. These sections, tracked sections of armour on the front of the hull had differing armour values to the rest of the front of the hull. That appears to no longer be the case. Just something worth bearing in mind. But these are certainly not weak points for you to aim at. But we'll take a look at the armour in a little bit. Mobility wise, it's a 700 horsepower engine, and it is mounted on a, well, close as damn it, a 50-ton tank. So you actually get a fairly respectable horsepower per ton ratio of 14. Top speed of 38 kilometers an hour going forward, 15 in reverse, and a 33 degree per second traverse speed. So the mobility on this tank is actually fairly respectable. It can move around the battlefield very comfortably. It does feel like a heavy tank, but it's definitely one of the faster heavy tanks. Camo rating is, well, it's not fantastic, but it's relatively good for a heavy tank. But, you know, don't rely on your camo most of the time. This is where we get to one of the big weaknesses of the tank, though. The view range on the tank, before any upgrades and whatnot, is 350, which is bloody awful for a Tier 8 machine. Mine is currently sitting at 365, and that's because I've got my crew are all at 100%, so you get the commander's boost adding to that. I've got full brothers in arms on this crew as well. So both of those things are contributing towards the view range, but it's still pretty terrible. You're not going to be spotting a great deal of much in this tank, so don't rely on that. We will talk more about the gun. We'll talk more about the gun now, actually. Let's bring up the gun. This is the top gun on the machine. There are a couple of other guns on the machine, but I'm not going to mention them in great detail now, because once you've got the top gun, you're going to use it. This is the 122mm BL9. 122mm gun, obviously, 4.51 rounds per minute rate of fire, which doesn't sound fantastic, but we'll get onto that again in a sec. 225 penetration with armor-piercing rounds, which is pretty good. 265 with APCR, which is fairly respectable for a Tier 8 heavy tank. 68 penetration with high explosive, which is very good and characteristic of this large caliber gun. Alpha damage, 390. 530 with your HE ammo. So actually, when you combine the rate of fire with the alpha damage, okay, the DPM from the IS-3 isn't fantastic, but it's also actually not as bad as you might think. It only lags slightly behind the Carnarvon, which has 230 alpha damage. Now, I think that probably says more about the Carnarvon's DPM than it does about the IS-3's. But given that 390 alpha damage for an awful long time was basically the highest of any Tier 8 heavy tank, it's only recently been overtaken by the 440 you get on the VK, whatever it's called, the new Tier 8 German heavy tank, and of course on the Defender. Okay, technically the T-34 has more, but it's basically the same. Given that this has amongst the highest alpha damage of any Tier 8 heavy tank, you'd expect the DPM to be worse than it is. 0.4 dispersion at 100 meters, this is not a sniper rifle, and a 3.4 second aim time are not good aiming stats. However, let's just briefly bring up the sort of gun you have been used to using on these Soviet heavy tanks from about Tier 6 and upwards. And when you get down to the dispersion values, you'll notice that while the 0.4 on the IS-3 is not good, it is considerably better than the 0.46 that you've been used to. And actually, although the 3.4 second aim time on the IS-3's BL9 gun is not good, the soft stats are actually surprisingly good. And so no, this thing does not aim like a sniper rifle, but you will be surprised at how not terrible the gun handling on this weapon is. You expect it to be much worse, but it's just not. The IS-3 actually snap shoots really surprisingly well. I would argue this is among the best guns to be found on a Tier 8 heavy tank overall. Certainly when you consider the platform it's mounted on. This is not a gun that's designed to be sniped with, and this is not a tank that's designed for sniping. Much like the other Soviet heavy tanks, this is a tank that's designed to get in your face and beat the hell out of you with a baseball bat with a nail in it. And yes, I appreciate the irony of referencing a predominantly American sport there, but this is a pretty brutal bully of a tank, and the gun is a pretty brutal bully of a gun. Get my words out. It is a good gun to have. And that really does define the IS-3. It is just a good all-round heavy tank. The armour is good, the gun is good, the mobility is good. The only way in which the IS-3 is perhaps not, which it lags behind some of the other machines at its tier, really, is combat at range. You have a pretty terrible view range and your accuracy isn't great. But you know what? The way the maps in this game are at the moment, that doesn't really matter. There are plenty of opportunities to get up close and personal and just beat the enemy to death. There is a reason this machine is one of the most common tier 8s to be found. It is one of the most common machines to be found in clan events when tier 8 tanks are the flavour of the month. It is a very, very, very good machine. So, let's have a quick look at consumables, crew skills, and then we'll also have a quick look at the grind. Consumables, I take your standard 3. Your ammo rack can occasionally be a problem in this tank. It's not as much a problem as it is in some others, but it can be an issue, so yeah, you want that repair kit. You do occasionally lose crew members. The frontal hull armor, we'll talk about that in a bit, but the frontal hull armor, whilst not bad, is also not absolutely fantastic, and your driver sits right behind this pike nose. So you can lose your driver here or there, and in my opinion, a Soviet tank without a fire extinguisher is just asking to burn, and they do burn quite well. So I've just got your standard 3 consumables here. You might want to slightly mix it up. That's entirely up to you. Ammunition, in my opinion, 390 alpha damage, 225 pen is really good on your standard armor piercing rounds. They're relatively expensive. They're over 1,000 credits each, but you do hit for 390. Your APCR rounds are even more expensive, 4,800, and you get a limited ammo supply on a lot of these Soviet tanks. Now what I do is I take 2 rounds of high explosive, because occasionally it's useful, but you don't want to take a lot of it. 3 rounds of APCR, and I don't think I've ever used all 3 in any given match. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever used more than 2. You really don't need it a lot of the time in my experience, and the rest armor piercing. The AP ammo on this tank is pretty darn sweet. Equipment, nothing hugely surprising. You can now finally fit a vertical stabilizer on this tank, so do so. Rammer, of course, 10% more DPM is just good. You want it. Third equipment slot, you could go for an enhanced gun laying drive, but honestly I don't think you should bother. The vents, in my opinion, is the way to go. Optics and things like that, don't bother with. An extra 10% of a crappy view range is still bad, so there's not really any point. I would say these are the 3 equipment pieces you want to go with. Crew skills, Sixth Sense, of course. Repairs, I mean, yeah, it's a heavy tank. Safe stowage, like I said, you do sometimes have ammo rack issues with this tank, so I would recommend safe stowage. Brothers in arms, the standard good stuff. Don't worry too much about the view range enhancing skills, because again, the view range is terrible. And so whilst you could incrementally increase that, I think your skills would be better put in other things, and just accept that your view range is never going to be great. Lastly, let's have a quick look at the grind for this particular tank. So we're sitting here, obviously, at tier 8 on the more mobile Soviet heavy tank line. So if we follow this tank line all the way through, obviously you start off at the MS1 at tier 1, who cares? T26, tier 2, sure, fine, whatever. T46 at tier 3, nothing particularly special. T28 at tier 4, this can be a bit of an awkward machine. Big, terrible armor, pretty mobile, good gun, but really struggles from that size. I didn't like it, some people do, to each their own. Then you go to the KV-1, which is a very, very good tier 5 heavy tank. Most people don't seem to have many particular problems with it, and that's where you get your choice. You can then go to either the KV-2 at tier 6, but that doesn't really lead anywhere apart from to the artillery. You can go to the T-150 at tier 6, which leads up to the IS-4 heavy tank line. You get to the KV-3, the KV-4, etc. Or you can sidestep. Now, when I originally played this bit of the tech tree, you jumped straight from the KV-1 into what was then the KV-1S at tier 6. But now that KV-1S has been broken down into 2 tanks, you can't get directly to the tier 6 on this tech line, which is now the KV-85. You have to sidestep to the KV-1S. Looks like a reasonable machine. I haven't actually played it, so I'm not going to comment. KV-85, ditto applies. I played the tier 6 when it was the old KV-1S. I have not played the KV-85, so it looks like a KV-1S, the old KV-1S that is, that has been turned into a respectable tier 6. It looks alright, but I've not played it, so I'm not going to pass massive comments. IS, fairly decent tank. I don't think it's the best tier 7 heavy tank, but it's not the worst, and I do have a review of this machine if you are interested. And then you get to the IS-3 itself. And when you do so, what sort of modules are you likely to have unlocked? Well, you won't have the top suspension or the top turret. They're always unique to that particular tank. The engine, the top engine, I mean the stock engine, how good is it? It's 650 horsepower. It's nice to get that little buff. The top engine carries over from the IS, so you should just be able to grab that straight away. The top radio, now this doesn't carry over from the IS, unfortunately, at tier 7. You do get it on the KV-3, the other tier 7 though. You also get it on the MT-25, T-54 Lightweight, Object 430 version 2. So if you've played some of the other tech lines, you might have this top radio unlocked. If not, you might have to grind it out. This second radio though, you will have, and honestly, 625 meter view range up to 730. Who cares? Don't prioritize the radios. Turret, of course, you'll have to unlock on this tank. In terms of the guns, this 122mm D25T gun you should already have unlocked. And now here's the thing. This gun is pretty garbage on the IS-3. The aim time is horrible, and the lack of penetration is painful, and it's actually quite nasty to use on this tank. This is the top gun, which we've already talked about. It's a very good gun, and that's really what I would prioritize. It is 44,000 experience to unlock. You should already have unlocked all of the preceding guns, so this is the first thing I would try and unlock. The BL9 really does revolutionize this tank. If you use the stock gun or the other guns on this tank, it will be painful experience. The BL9 is just beautiful. So, prioritize the BL9. Once you've done that, get any of the other bits you want to in whatever order you want. The top turret, you do want this because it improves your gun performance. However, you do take a little bit of a hit in terms of that roof armor on the stock turret is just better. So, swings and roundabouts. But I would recommend prioritizing this BL9 gun, and then of course once you've got it fully upgraded, then you can grind out for the T10. I don't think there's anything else I particularly wanted to cover in the garage, so let's go and have a look at things like module locations, armor, values, and some gameplay. Okay, then let's have a look at the IS-3's module locations. Frontally, there's nothing massively surprising, though you've got your driver sitting here right at the front behind the pike nose, taking a look round at the side of the tank. It's not hugely surprising that you've got engines and whatnot in the rear of the machine. You've of course got your crew members up in the turret, your commander, your gunner, and your loader. Most interestingly though, I would say, are the ammo rack locations. You have an ammo rack in the side of the hull just here below the turret, and another ammo rack towards the rear of the turret and towards the base of the turret. So those can catch you out. You do occasionally get ammo racked in an IS-3. You can see from the rear this ammo rack stretches round to the rear of the turret here, and there's another one on the other side of the turret that curves around the side of that turret, and again more ammo rack below the turret in the hull. So the ammo rack location on this tank is pretty symmetrical, and this tank does occasionally get ammo racked. It's not often enough to be a massive hindrance, but it is something that you should definitely be aware of, and there isn't really anything else to note about module locations for this particular tank. Obviously you've got your engine deck and fuel tanks and everything back here behind the
Just
turret.
before talking about the armour again, I'll mention the gun depression. It's 5 degrees around the front of the tank. Around the rear it's 1 degree, and little bits here that are in between, but it's 5 to the front and 1 to the rear essentially. So that armour profile, well, interestingly, well, not so interestingly, rear of the turret, okay, 70mm of armour, but with all this angling, the effective armour on the rear of the turret is actually around about 100mm. So if you are a lower tier light tank, you might actually want to avoid shooting this thing in the back of the turret. If you've got the back of this tank, back of the hull is a way better bet. Side armour, side of the hull is 90mm, plus of course you get this diamond shaped Soviet strip of purest bullshitanium, giving you effective armour for that space section of 200, and that's before you angle it. If this side armour is angled, I mean, that's just a whole can of nope, really, isn't it? Front of the tank, though, this is where the pike nose comes into play and where things can be slightly interesting. Let's just move a little bit away from the tank. So, frontal pike nose is decent, but do be aware of the weaknesses. You can get between about 170 and 220mm of effective armour on the front of this pike nose without angling it. If you angle it, of course, then the side of the pike nose that you angle, one side of the pike nose is going to become weaker, that's this side, and the other side will become stronger. So you do need to be careful about angling the frontal armour on this tank. Having a look at the turret, you've got, well, 170 odd armour, 249 armour. It's a weird armour layout because it means that here in the turret cheeks, where the turret would otherwise be the weakest because you've got this curved location, that is where the armour is actually the thickest. And then round here to the sides, the thickness is less, sorry, but the angle is greater. So the thinnest the armour gets on the turret is about 270mm, so you ain't going through that most of the time. Gun mantlet, well, the armour value's, yeah, 1200 and something there at one point, just don't bother. However, turret roof, okay, so you do have a little commander's hatch here, although, I mean, yeah, you can penetrate it, but it's a pretty small target. You do also have the turret roof, which is only 20mm thick. You can overmatch this with completely overmatch it with a 61mm gun. Now, there's no such thing in the game, but 75mm guns will completely overmatch this tank. 75mm and larger. In fact, the only tank off the top of my head that I can think of that won't completely overmatch this tank would actually meet, the only ones are, you've got the 57mm guns found on some of the Chinese and Soviet light tanks. At the time of recording this is still patch 9.17 for me, so I'm thinking predominantly of the MT-25 and the 5916, though of course patch 9.18 may slightly mix that up a little bit, but saving that, pretty much anything can go through your turret roof if they have the right angle. However, yeah, it's not the easiest target to hit unless you are slightly above the tank, and the IS-3 is very low profile, so this is something worth noting. If you have a relatively tall tank, you might be able to shoot down on the roof or down on the upper front plate itself, significantly reducing the effective armour of this part of the tank. So the IS-3 overall, it's fairly well armoured machine, but you can penetrate it with, let's say, 200mm of penetration and upwards if you know what you're doing fairly reliably, though of course you will get sometimes where it's just like nope, and it all goes to pot. Bear that in mind. Anyway, I think it's time we went and had a look at some gameplay. Here we go with our first game then, tier 8 match, so the IS-3 here is top tier, but I've specifically chosen a game that is not ridiculously spectacular, because the IS-3 really is one of those machines that, given the right opportunity, and especially a top tier game, can just destroy teams. It is an incredibly powerful machine. Also, a quick apology. Once again, we're having replay version issues, and so I'm afraid you can't see the ammunition I've got loaded, the reload, or anything along those lines. Played this game around about the time when I picked up 2 marks of excellence on me IS-3. I'm not a particularly fantastic player, but, you know, IS-3 does IS-3 things. Now, tier 8 game, of course, what does that mean? It means our 390 alpha damage is brutal. It means our armor is pretty good, actually, though not impenetrable. It means our 225 penetration is very tasty. And our good soft stats are awesome. So we're going over to the heavy tank brawling location on this map. It's about the only choke point left on this map, and it is quite difficult for artillery to get shots down here a lot of the time now. So there are a few things that have changed since, well, way back when I remember playing this map the first time around. So I managed to track the T-3485 there. He bounces harmlessly off the side of my tank. Don't pay any attention to the kind of damage counter or anything like that. But we are able to put a shot into the big fat commander's cupola of the 112, and he just bounces harmlessly off me, which is not a bad start. In this sort of situation, the 112, where it doesn't really matter if he loads heat or not, that was a terrible shot. He really needs to be aiming for my turret roof. If he loads heat, as it sounds like he's done, or if he loads regular armor piercing, doesn't really matter. He'll overmatch my turret roof anyway, and he'll bounce off my turret anyway, so it really is a bit immaterial. Other IS-3 on our team has decided he's going to come forward and take this corner, which is slightly irritating. The reason that I haven't gone to his exact position is that you can be artilleried there. And they do have 2 quite scary artillery pieces on their team. So I'm like, alright, fine. You want that corner, I'm going to go somewhere else. Now, we've got a T-34 around here on pretty low health. But it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get a shot on him. Oh, never mind, he's gone to a better place. There is an AMX M449 Liberté, and you can see he manages to penetrate us there. Can't see where it went through, but it probably just went through the front of the tank. His regular armor piercing rounds have about 232 I think it is penetration. And so penetrating the frontal hull of my tank is certainly something he's able to do without loading premium ammunition or anything like that. Having said that, for some god-awful reason, he's giving me his side to shoot at, so I put one into him in return. And there is artillery. Thankfully, it doesn't do a huge amount of damage. The main thing it does is blow our tracks off. It does do a little bit of damage, but nothing to really concern me. It could have been far worse. And now, trying to get a shot on the rear of this enemy IS-3. I take a shell for my troubles, but it means that IS-3 dies, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Liberté pops out once again, puts a shot into our T-54 Mod 1, who dies. Liberté takes a shell himself in return, and now the Liberté has probably reloaded so that I don't just want to go around that corner and eat another 100mm shell to the face. Now, frontally, Liberté is going to be difficult for me to penetrate. The spot I need to aim for is that commander's cupola. That is relatively weak, and I can put shots into that. Jagdtiger 88 is also around here, and if he's in a hull down position, he can also be quite difficult for me to deal with. He's not quite hull down, but I'm struggling with gun depression to get a shot there. Take that shot. I'm aiming for the machine gun port on the front of the upper front plate, which I think is a weak spot off the top of my head, though I could be proven wrong. Unfortunately, it bounces, and, well, I take a shot from the Jagdtiger 88, but if the Liberté is going to give me a shot through the axle there, I'll take it, and, yeah, he will take some damage. So I get shot there by the Jagdtiger. Again, 200mm of penetration, assuming he's firing armor piercing, is enough, assuming your shots are well aimed, to go through the front of this tank. Try and take a shot there at the lower front plate of the Jagdtiger, but the shot isn't very well aimed. I don't really have the time to, and the Jagdtiger has just backed off. so that I can't really penetrate him with my next shell. Now, superstructure of the Jagdtiger is around about 250-ish millimeters thick. You can wreck it with an APCR round from this tank, or a HE round. Either of them would probably take this guy out at this point. But instead, I think, rather than getting myself into a fight with a hull-down Jagdtiger, which is not a great situation, let's go and do something about the Hellcat, but our T-34 kills the Hellcat, and so, okay, sure, fine. Let's keep going, move around, and see who else I can deal with. There's a KV-2 over here that I might be able to do something about, maybe. Trying not to just approach the Jagdtiger frontally, because in that sort of engagement he has all the advantages that he wants. But if he's just going to run away there, I will put one into him. Bouncer shot from the Panther 2. This is a patch 9.16 replay, so I believe it's before the Panther 2 got the big gun. So this is 200mm of penetration. He's basically using the same gun as the Jagdtiger 88 there. Bouncing off my turret and angled hull front. But 200 is enough to go through the front of this tank in the right situation, so I don't just want to give the guy shots at me. And especially if he decides to load APCR, 230 something is certainly enough to be a problem. And I thought I might have got a shot on the Panther 2, but alas, no joy. KV-2 and then the 2 artillery pieces are the ones left then. We've got this IKV coming around, but it's the T-28 who actually nails the KV-2, and then it's just a couple of artillery pieces to take out. And that is this game. Not a massively spectacular game, but I didn't want to show you a massively spectacular game. I mean, I could do, and the IS-3 is certainly capable of it, but I just wanted to show you a very average game in the IS-3. Did I say the IS-2 is certainly capable of it? I meant the IS-3, if that's what I said. My brain is getting a little bit befuddled. What can you do? Right, let's speed this along a little bit until we find the artillery. So there is the M12, and we're able to kill him. And that just leaves the S51 over here. Are we going to be able to pick up the kill on this guy as well? Nah, alas not. And that is the game. So let's go and have a look at the results. There we go then, that was enough for Second Class Mastery, Duelist, Fire for Effect, and Hand of God. We finished second on our team, 1,617 damage done, 3 kills, 898 base experience. Like I said, this wasn't a spectacular game, and actually, although 1,617 damage done is okay for a tier 8 tank, it's actually lower than the average amount of damage that I do in the IS-3, but there we go. 11 shots fired, 8 hits, 6 penetrations for that damage count, most of which was from pretty close range. 8 hits received, 3 penned, 5 did not. Couple of splash damage there, 1,440 damage blocked by our armour, and 516 assistance damage. You can, however, see the shell price is relatively high, so we didn't make a huge profit there, only 4,500 credits from that game. So that is a bottom tier game. I mean, like I said, nothing particularly spectacular, but let's move on to the top tier game. Okay then, tier 10 match. Now, I'm tuned up with Majestic Spoon in this particular game. And although this is a tier 10 match, there are actually quite a lot of tier 8s on either side. So we've only got 4 tier 10s, 3 tier 9s, and the rest are tier 8s on each team. So that is, whilst obviously this is still a bottom tier game, there are definitely games that could have been worse. Now initially I was thinking, right, let's go over towards the forest and let's brawl, because that's what the IS-3 does. And I'm looking at this and thinking, what have we got? There's me in an IS-3 in a tier 10 match, a Type 62 who's just decided, nah, you know what, I'm good, and then a Bat-Chat. And the Bat-Chat, well, don't get me wrong, a Bat-Chat's a very, very good tank, but as soon as he runs out of clip, out of magazine, well, he's useless for a considerable amount of time. Probably shouldn't have taken that shot. So I decided to back off. Now I say I probably shouldn't have taken that shot because it could have gotten me spotted. As it turns out, it clearly didn't, because the sixth sense that I do have on this tank commander didn't go off. And so with a rather inaccurate gun, I'm left trying to see if I can give any fire support to this Batchat and keep him alive as long as I possibly can. Now, Majestic has taken the low ground here, as say we were thinking about going into the wood. Hello, Mr. M48 Pattern, and we bounced on him. Yeah, can't really complain too much. I mean, this gun is not made for sniping. But I'm, like I said, just trying to see if I can, well, help that Batchat out, because otherwise, that's a tier 10 tank that is just dead. And our Batchat is now going to complain and whinge endlessly in chat and call us a whole bunch of bad names. But the fact remains, there is a mini-map. You can see that you are alone. Don't be. Rule number 1 of this game, or number 3, or whatever. Very important rule of this game and any other team-based game. Don't go alone. Anyway. With that idiotic Batchat now dealt with, I have pulled the hell back. Now, Majestic is doing the same thing. However, he's going to find it quite difficult to get out of the low ground that he's currently in without exposing his tank. And so what you're actually going to get in this game is, well, Majestic, through a chunk of it, is essentially going to be playing Scout. Yes, there's a T10 and an AMX 1390 over there. Don't worry, they won't last too long. So, scoreline is 1-3, which isn't a particularly good start. M48 Pattern. Again, this gun is not designed for sniping, but I'm trying to stop this encroachment of enemy tanks as best I can and give Majestic what fire support I can. So that's one into the side of the big fat M48 Fatten there. There's another. There are 2 patterns in this match. Yes, there are. And there goes our T10. And we're losing this game quite badly at the moment, in case that wasn't apparent. Pattern pops up, and I take a shot. There we go. Snipey snipe. And our T10 is also crying and whinging. Again, you were outnumbered and outfought. I'm not sure why you even went over there. Now, Majestic takes a hit there, unfortunately. But then he kills the Pattern, so screw you, Mr. Pattern. Screw you. WZ132 is trying something. Take that shot, but again, the BL9 gun is not what you would call particularly accurate. And this is going to be a rather unconventional IS-3 game because, well, it's not really going to be that much of a brawl a lot of the time. It's not a map that you get brawls on as much as you do other maps, and as I say, I'm trying to help keep Majestic alive and trying to stem the tide of the bad guys. Have that shot at the VK, mine hits. Majestic also had a shot previously, so we're making that VK regret his life decisions, and now he's a one-shot for whoever takes the shot at him, so of course my next shot misses. That's just how these things work. Scoreline is 3-6, we're still 3 tanks behind, which is not optimal. VK has decided he's going to stick to the low ground. He don't like being shot. Whoa, that was a bit of a replay bug by the look of it. Can't really say I blame him. I mean, yeah, he doesn't have much health left, and this is a tier 10 match at the end of the day. Are you 251? Nope, fair enough. So, yeah. As that we know of, there's an Indian Panzer, RU-251, there goes our IS-7, Skoda T50, VK M48, and I'd already mentioned the RU over yonder. Type 62 takes out the RU-251, and thus we only trail by 2 tanks. Indian Panzer appears to think that low ground and cover are for suckers, but I bounce on the side of him, so what are you going to do? This is a very, very good gun, but it is not designed to be used at this sort of range. And there we go, we finally managed to execute that Indian Panzer. Majestic is now on very low health, but he is still, along with our assistants, holding back that entire flank. Who says you can't do anything in a tier 10 match in a tier 8 tank? Right, we're now only 1 tank behind. AMX 1390 appears to be suitably distracted. And shebang. Just lost another couple of tanks, which is a bit unfortunate. Going after this 1390. He's got 170 pen. Oh, I take a hit from the T-34 there, which is slightly suboptimal. Put another one into the AMX 1390, and he is done. Enemy T-34, well, the T-34 has a pretty garbage reload, so I'm not expecting to take another shot from him. Hoping I don't take another shot from him. Majestic takes out that VK, and suddenly the score lines are even at 9 kills apiece. And just as I say that, of course, our T-32 goes to a better place. Now, we have lost all of our tier 10 tanks at this point. We had an FV-215B platoon, an IS-7 and a Batchat. The Batchat threw his life away right at the beginning. The FV platoon and the IS-7 have all been fighting it out on that corner, and they're currently all dead. And we only have one tier 9 tank. The rest of us are tier 8s or even tier 7s in the case of that Type 62. So this is looking a little bit dodgy. Now, we're going to have an interesting shot come up in a moment. But first, that's a Type 5 heavy and I don't want to get shot by him. That would be suboptimal. Now, there's a Jagdpanzer E-100 coming around this corner. And at this point, I was thinking, right, let's load an APCR shell and go for his lower front plate, and unfortunately the T-34 finally takes out Majestic, but Majestic had a really solid roll there. So, Jagdpanzer E-100, I had thought... Oh, there goes the Skoda. So, I take a shot at the Borsig and take him out. Now, I load an APCR round here, or rather, I thought I had loaded an APCR round here to try and deal with the Jagdpanzer. So I'm looking at this situation going, right, I cannot be caught by a Type 5 heavy and a Jagdpanzer at once. That's going to be bad. APCR through the lower front plate of this Jagdpanzer E-100. Really chancy shot, and I actually kill him. Now, that was not... I didn't think that was a particularly lucky shot. I take a hit from the T-34 there, because I thought I'd fired APCR. As it turned out, that was actually an armor-piercing shell. I did double check. I had not loaded the APCR round that I thought I had. So instead of having 265 pen to go through that lower front plate of the Jagdpanzer, I actually only had 225. So I assume that was a very high penetration roll, because that was just lucky. Go round and manage to kill the T-34, and now I'm going to use his corpse as cover, and suddenly this Type 5 heavy is the only one left. But it's against me and a T-44. I keep the Type 5's attention, T-44 gets round the side and finishes him off, and that ends up being the game. So let's go and have a look at the results for this one. As I mentioned, very definitely not a typical match there for the IS-3. It's not the sort of map you'd generally think the IS-3 would excel at, and it wasn't the sort of role you'd generally think it would excel at, as I was sniping a lot of the time. But nonetheless, let's not argue. First class mastery, fighter, fire for effect, and bruiser. Looking at the team list, we actually came top of our team, and I just thought I'd highlight Majestic there as he came second on our team. We did 3,063 damage, got 4 kills, and got 1,223 base experience, remembering that a lot of the time we were shooting higher tier tanks. Majestic got 2,029 damage, 2 kills, and 1,595 assistance damage, and also a shout out to both the T-32 with 2,204 damage and the Type 62 there, who picked up 3 kills. 1, 2, 3, 4 effectively bottom tier tanks there right at the top of our team list. Now, I'm not saying that other people didn't put in a good contribution. The FV-215B there, in fact the FV platoon, had a respectable result, and the IS-7 did over 3.3k damage. So they also contributed. A lot of the people on our team did not. That Batchat, who was whinging right at the beginning, didn't do very well at all, and neither did the T10, given that he was a tier 9 machine. He did okay, but nothing particularly spectacular. So, 16 shots fired, 13 hits, 10 penetrations, for a total of 3,000 damage, 1,154 from more than 300 meters. So even though we were sniping a lot, most of that damage was actually from relatively close range. Received 3 hits, all of them penetrated in that particular match. I wasn't able to bounce a single shot. 8 enemy vehicles damaged, 4 destroyed, a little bit of assistance damage as well, and We didn't actually fire a single APCR round that match because 16,400 ammunition resupply costs, 16 shots fired, that's just 16 AP rounds. So I thought I'd fired an APCR round, but I had not, which makes that penetration on the Jagdpanzer rather interesting. And I did actually double check when I saw that. I went and rewatched the video, and it was indeed an armor-piercing round that killed that Jagdpanzer. So, 1,223 experience received, 122 boost for playing in a platoon, 61 free XP, yeah. A fairly nice haul there, even with a standard account. Profitability wasn't fantastic, but then 6 of our shells didn't do any damage, so what can you expect? Anyway, there we go, a couple of replays for the IS-3. Let's go and jump back into the garage. Verdicts time then on the IS-3. Well, as I've already mentioned, I think this is the best Tier 8 heavy tank that I have played. Certainly the best of the regular, so non-premium Tier 8 heavy tanks that I've played. I have not played the Japanese Oho, and I have not played the Swedish ML1, but I've played all the others. And honestly, I think this tank is a little bit too good. I am going to be keeping it because it's just really good. I think this thing should probably be nerfed a little bit. In what sort of way? I think they could slap the gun a little bit, to be honest. It's a very comfortable gun to use. They could probably slap the gun handling on it. That'd probably be the first thing I would do, and then see what happens. Because I do think really... I mean, when you compare things like the KV-4 to this, the KV-4 seems so sad. And then you've got the 110, a tank that I think is actually very well balanced at Tier 8, but this is just better. So I would nerf the IS-3 a bit, to be honest. Starting with the gun, probably. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review of the Tier 8 Soviet heavy tank, the IS-3. If you did, by all means feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.